you are about to experience, Jackson Snyder presents. We will examine the life of our Master Yeshua by discovering his ancestors, family, and friends, by reviewing rare, ancient manuscripts, and speaking to those who know him best. From the Vero Essene Yahad, now experience, Jackson Snyder presents.
My name is Asa Alonzo Allen, and I was born March 27th, 1911. I died June the 11th, 1970, in the Jack Tar Hotel in San Francisco, California. You may not have heard of me, but in the 40s to the 1960s, I was very well known as the premier healing evangelist and prophet in the United States of America. On Independence Day of 1954, I had a vision of the destruction of America. As I stood atop the Empire State Building, I could see the Statue of Liberty illuminating the gateway to the New World. Here, spread before me like an animated map, is an area 60 or 80 miles in diameter. I was amazed that the Spirit of the Lord should so move me there atop the Empire State Building. Why should I feel such a surge of His Spirit and power there? Suddenly, I heard the voice of the Lord. It was as clear and as distinct as a voice could be. It seemed to come from the very midst of the giant telescope. But when I looked at the telescope, I knew it hadn't come from there, but directly from heaven. The voice said,
"The eyes of the Lord run to and fro throughout the whole earth to show himself strong in behalf of them whose heart is perfect toward him. Herein you have done foolishly. Therefore, from henceforth, you shall have wars."
Immediately, when I heard the voice of God, I knew this was a quotation from Scripture. But never before had a thing come to me so forcibly by the power of the Spirit. The ticking of the telescope stopped. The man before me had used up his dime's worth. As he stepped away, I knew that I was next. As I stepped up to the telescope and dropped in my dime, immediately the ticking started sounding again. This ticking was an automatic clock, which would allow me to use the telescope for a definite, limited time only. And I swung that telescope to the north. Suddenly, the Spirit of God came upon me in a way that I had never thought of before. Seemingly, in the Spirit, I was entirely raptured away. I knew that the telescope itself had nothing to do with the distance that I was suddenly enabled to see, for I seemed to see things far beyond the range of the telescope, even on a bright, clear day. It was simply that God had chosen this time to reveal these things to me. For as I looked through the telescope, it was not Manhattan Island that I saw, but a far larger view. That morning, much of the view was impaired by fog, but suddenly, as the Spirit of the Lord came upon me, the fog seemed to clear, until it seemed that I could see for thousands of miles. But that which I was looking upon was not Manhattan Island. It was all of the North American continent, spread out before me as a map is spread out on a table. It was not the East River and the Hudson River that I saw on either side, but the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. And instead of the Statue of Liberty standing there in the bay on her small island, I saw her standing far out in the Gulf of Mexico. She was between me and the United States. I suddenly realized that the telescope had nothing to do with what I was seeing, but that it was a vision coming directly from God. And to prove this to myself, I took my eyes away from the telescope so that I was no longer looking through the lens, but the same scene remained before me. There, clear and distant, lay all the North American continent with all its great cities. To the north lay the Great Lakes. Far to the northeast was New York City. I could see Seattle and Portland far to the northwest. Down the west coast, there was San Francisco and Los Angeles. Closer in the foreground, there lay New Orleans at the center of the Gulf Coast area. I could see the great towering ranges of the Rocky Mountains and trace with my eye the Continental Divide. All this and more I could see spread out before me as a great map upon the table. And as I looked, suddenly from the sky, I saw a giant hand reach down. That gigantic hand was reaching out toward the Statue of Liberty. In a moment, her gleaming torch was torn from her hand, and in it instead was placed a cup. And I saw protruding from that great cup a giant sword, shining as if a great light had been turned upon its glistening edge. Never before had I seen such a sharp, glistening, dangerous sword. It seemed to threaten the whole world. As the great cup was placed in the hand of the Statue of Liberty, I heard these words,
Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Drink ye, and be drunken, spew and fall, and rise no more, because of the sword that I shall send.
As I heard these words, I recognized them as a quotation from Jeremiah 25. I was amazed to hear the Statue of Liberty speak out in reply, I will not drink. Then as the voice of the thunder, I heard again the voice of the Lord saying,
Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Ye shall certainly drink.
Then suddenly the giant hand forced the cup to the lips of the Statue of Liberty, and she became powerless to defend herself. The mighty hand of God forced her to drink every drop from the cup. As she drank the bitter dregs, these were the words that I heard.
Should you be utterly unpunished? You shall not be unpunished, for I will call for a sword upon all the inhabitants of the earth,
saith the Lord of hosts. When the cup was withdrawn from the lips of the Statue of Liberty, I noticed the sword was missing from the cup, which could mean only one thing. The contents of the cup had been completely consumed. I knew that the sword merely typified war, death, and destruction, which is no doubt on the way. Then, as one drunken on too much wine, I saw the Statue of Liberty become unsteady on her feet and begin to stagger and to lose her balance. I saw her splashing in the Gulf, trying to regain her balance. I saw her stagger again and again and fall to her knees. As I saw her desperate attempts to regain her balance and rise to her feet again, my heart was moved as never before with compassion for her struggles. But as she staggered there in the Gulf, once again I heard these words,
Ye shall drink and be drunken and spew and fall and rise no more because of the sword that I shall send among you.
As I watched, I wondered if the Statue of Liberty would ever be able to regain her feet, if she would ever stand again. and as I watched, it seemed that with all her power she struggled to rise, and finally staggered to her feet again and stood there swaying drunkenly. I felt sure that any moment she would fall again, possibly never to rise. I seemed overwhelmed with the desire to reach out my hand to keep her head above the water, for I knew that if she ever fell again, she would drown there in the gulf.
Thou shalt not be afraid for the terror by night, nor for the pestilence that walketh in the darkness, nor for the destruction that wastes at noonday.
Then as I watched, another amazing thing was taking place. Far to the northwest, just out over Alaska, a huge black cloud was arising. As it rose, it was as black as night. It seemed to be in the shape of a man's head. As it continued to rise, I observed two light spots in the black cloud. It rose further, and a gaping hole appeared. I could see that the black cloud was taking the shape of a skull. For now the huge white gaping mouth was plainly visible. Finally, the head was complete. Then the shoulders began to appear, and on either side, long black arms. It seemed that what I saw was the entire North American continent, spread out like a map upon a table, with this terrible skeleton form cloud arising from behind the table. It rose steadily until the form was visible down to the waist. At the waist, the skeleton seemed to bend towards the United States, stretching forth a hand toward the east and one toward the west, one toward New York and one toward Seattle. As that awful form stretched forward, I could see that the entire attention seemed to be focused upon the U.S., overlooking Canada, at least for the time being. I saw the horrible black cloud in the form of a skeleton bending toward America, bending from the waist over, reaching down toward Chicago, and out toward both coasts. I knew its one interest was to destroy the multitudes. As I watched in horror, the great black cloud stopped just above the Great Lakes region and turned its face toward New York City. Then out of the horrible great gaping mouth began to appear wisps of white vapor, which looked like smoke, as a cigarette smoker would blow puffs of smoke from his mouth. These whitish vapors were being blown toward New York City. The smoke began to spread until it had covered all the eastern part of the United States. Then the skeleton turned to the west, and out of the horrible mouth and nostrils came another great puff of white smoke. This time it was blown in the direction of the West Coast. In a few moments' time, the entire West Coast and the Los Angeles area was covered with its vapors. Then towards the center came a third great puff, and as I watched, St. Louis and Kansas City were enveloped in its white vapors. Then on it came towards New Orleans. Then on they swept until they reached the Statue of Liberty, where she stood staggering drunkenly in the blue waters of the Gulf. As the white vapors began to spread around the head of the statue, she took in but one gasping breath, and then began to cough, as though to rid her lungs of the horrible vapors she had inhaled. One could readily discern by that coughing that those white vapors had seared her lungs. What were these white vapors? Could they signify bacteriological warfare? Could they signify nerve gas? Gas that could destroy millions of people in a few moments' time? Then I heard the voice of God as he spoke again.
Behold, the Lord maketh the earth empty, and maketh it waste, and turned it upside down, and scattered abroad the inhabitants thereof. And it shall be, as with the people, so with the priest. As with the servant, so with his master. As with the buyer, so with the seller. As with the taker of usury, so with the giver of usury to him. The land shall be utterly emptied and utterly spoiled. For the Lord has spoken this word. The earth mourneth and fadeth away. The world languisheth and fadeth away. The haughty people of the earth, they do languish. The earth also is defiled under the inhabitants thereof, because they have transgressed the laws, changed the ordinance, broken the everlasting covenant. Therefore has the curse devoured the earth, and they that dwell therein are desolate. Therefore the inhabitants of the earth are burned, and few men are left.
And as I watched, me, Brother Allen, the coughing grew worse. It sounded like a person was about to cough out his lungs. The statue was moaning and groaning. She was in mortal agony. The pain must have been terrific, as again and again she tried to clear her lungs of those horrible white vapors. I watched her there in the gulf as she staggered, clutching her lungs and her breast with her hands, and she fell. She fell to her knees, and in a moment she gave one final cough and made a last desperate effort to rise from her knees, and then fell face forward into the waters of the gulf and lay still as death. Tears ran down my face as I realized that she was dead. Only the lapping of the waves splashing over her body, which was partly underwater and partly out of water, broke the silence.
A fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness.
Suddenly the silence was shattered by the screaming of sirens. The sirens seemed to scream, "Run for your lives!" Never before have I heard such shrill screaming sirens. They seemed to be everywhere. To the north, the south, the east, and the west, there seemed to be a multitude of sirens. And as I looked, I saw people everywhere running. But it seemed none of them ran more than a few paces, but then they fell. And even as I had seen the statue struggling to regain her poise and balance and finally falling to die on her face, I now saw millions of people falling in the streets, on the sidewalks, struggling, and I heard their screams for mercy and help, and I heard that horrible coughing as though their lungs had been seared with fire, and I heard the moanings and groanings of the doomed and the dying, and as I watched, a few finally reached shelters, and above the moaning and groanings I heard these words:
"A noise shall come even to the ends of the earth, for the Lord has a controversy with the nations. He will plead with all flesh. He will give them that are wicked to the sword, saith the Lord. And behold, evil shall go forth from nation to nation, and a great whirlwind shall be raised up from the coasts of the earth. And the slain of the Lord shall be at that day from one end of the earth even unto the other end of the earth. They shall not be lamented, neither gathered nor buried. They shall be dung upon the ground."
Then suddenly I saw from the Atlantic and from the Pacific and out of the Gulf rocket-like objects that seemed to come up like fish leaping out of the water. High into the air they leaped, each headed in a different direction, but everyone towards the U.S. On the ground, the sirens screamed. They screamed louder, and up from the ground I saw similar rockets begin to ascend. To me, these appeared to be interceptor rockets, although they arose from different points all over the U.S. However, none of them seemed to be successful in intercepting the rockets that had risen from the ocean on every side. These rockets finally reached their maximum height. slowly turned over and fell back toward the earth in defeat. Then suddenly, the rockets that had leaped out of the ocean like fish all exploded at once. The explosion was ear-splitting. The next thing that I saw was a huge ball of fire. The only thing I've ever seen that resembled the thing I saw in my vision was the picture of the explosion of the H-bomb in the South Pacific. In my vision, it was so real. I seemed to feel a searing heat from it. As the vision spread before my eyes, I viewed the widespread desolation brought about by the terrific explosions. I could not help thinking, while the defenders of our nations have quibbled over what means of defense to use and neglected the only true means of defense, faith and dependence upon the true and living God, the thing that she greatly feared has come upon her. How true it has proven that, except the Lord keep the city, the watchman watches in vain. Then, as the noise of the battle subsided, to my ears came this quotation for Joel, the 2nd chapter.
Blow ye the trumpet in Zion, and sound an alarm in my holy mountain. Let all the inhabitants of the land tremble, for the day of the Lord cometh, for it is nigh at hand. A day of great darkness and gloominess, a day of clouds and thick darkness. As the morning spreads upon the mountains, a great people and a strong, there hath not been ever like this, neither shall be any more after it, even to the years of many generations. A fire devoureth before them, and behind them a flame burneth. The land is as the Garden of Eden before them, and behind them a desolate wilderness. Yea, and nothing shall escape them. The appearance of them is like the appearance of horses, and as horsemen so shall they run. Like the noise of chariots on the tops of mountains shall they leap, like the noise of a flame of fire that devoureth the stubble. As a strong people set in battle arrayed, before their face the people shall be much pained. All the faces shall gather blackness. They shall run like mighty men. They shall climb the wall like men of war, and they shall march every one on his ways, and they shall not break their ranks, neither shall one thrust another. They shall walk every one in his path, and when they fall upon the sword, they shall not be wounded. They shall run to and fro in the city. They shall run upon the wall. They shall climb up upon the houses. They shall enter in at the windows like a thief. The earth shall quake before them. The heavens shall tremble. The sun and moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their shining.
Then the voice was still. The earth, too, was silent, with the silence of death. And then to my ears came another sound. The sound of distant singing. It was the sweetest music I had ever heard. There was joyful shouting and sounds of happy laughter. Immediately, I knew it was the rejoicing of the saints of God. I looked, and there high in the heavens, above the smoke and poisonous gases, above the noise of the battle, I saw a huge mountain, and it seemed to be like a solid rock, and I knew at once that this was the mountain of the Lord. The sounds of music and rejoicing were coming from a cleft, high up in the side of the rock mountain. It was the saints of God who were doing the rejoicing, and it was God's own people who were singing and dancing and shouting with joy, safe from all the harm that had come upon the earth. For they were hidden safely away in the cleft of the rock. There in the cleft they were shut in, protected by a great giant hand, which reached out of the heavens, and which was none other than the hand of God, shutting them in. until the storm to be overpast. My name is Brother Asa Alonzo Allen. I was born March 27th, 1911, and I died June the 11th, 1970, at the Jack Tar Hotel in San Francisco.